assignment this morning for us, but he has chosen some of the old saws for us to sing, mostly because he can play them like a harp. John, it's great to have you back. It's feeling much better now. I'd also like to thank, once again, all those of you who helped out and attended the progressive dinner last night. I think over 135 people came for the progressive dinner. Obviously, an all-time record, and it was fabulous. Over the top in the best sense. It was great. Last Sunday, we had a couple visiting us, a brother and sister, adult brothers and sisters, who had retired from New Jersey and moved down here to Richmond and lived right across the street in the Belvedere complex across the street. And they were warmly welcomed by all of us at the 10 o'clock service last Sunday. And on Tuesday, as was my wont, I called the newcomers and I talked to the brother. And I said, well, how was your experience at St. Matthias? And he said, oh, it was wonderful for myself and my sister. He said, you know, we're the children of an Anglican priest who came from India. That's where they were born and raised. And they said that it was wonderful to be at such a lively Episcopal church. And I said, well, great. Does that mean that you're coming back? And he said, well, we're not going to be able to be at St. Matthias this coming Sunday, but I would like to come back. But you said something towards the end of the service that might be a barrier for us to come back. And I said, oh, what was that? And he said, well, you spoke of the progressive dinner coming up, he said, and both my sister and I are very conservative. So I had to explain to him how that expression in America came into being, because he had never heard of a progressive dinner. I guess they just simply don't have those in India. It was a learning experience for me. I want to talk to you about the gospel passage, which I'm sure has captured your attention when I read it, or whenever you read it as part of your daily meditation or private prayer time, because it smacks of cannibalism. It was that kind of talk that got the early Christians in trouble and even persecuted by the Roman emperors for being cannibalistic. This talk about eating the flesh and drinking the blood. And it's understandable, is it not, that it still offends us who are Christian, who hear this language and are somewhat repelled by it all. This notion of eating a human being's flesh and drinking a human being's blood somehow runs abhorrent to every fiber that is within us. We just don't do that as human beings, do we? Well, we're not the only ones who found it abhorrent. This goes back a long time in history. The ancient Jews at the time of Jesus wouldn't allow anything whatsoever to be eaten unless it had been drained of all of its blood. That's part of making things kosher, draining it of all of its blood. So this practice of consuming that which is flesh or drinking human blood goes back a long time, and instead of doing that, what developed was this notion of sacrifice, so that you wouldn't bring a human body to God in the temple, but you would bring an animal of some sort, and it was usually a prime animal, like the firstborn of all of the sheep. And you would offer that animal to God, and in the act of offering that sacrificial animal to God, somehow or another, there was transmitted through the animal God's blessing to you. It was as though the perfect lamb who was without blemish could be offered in the temple, and it was understood that somehow in the offering of that sacrifice, that God's blessing came to those who offered the lamb. Do you follow me so far? It runs very deep within the human psyche to do such things. That somehow or another, there is an animal that is given as an atonement, as a sacrifice, that allows us human beings to have a relationship with God. In a similar way, this recoil that we have about drinking human blood also has to be tempered with the fact that ancient people frequently would take the blood of someone who was revered and they would drink it as a way of allowing the nobility that was within that person to somehow get moved into their own blood system. It sounds archaic to us. In fact, the Jewish people prohibited the drinking of blood. And that practice even continues in some Christian denominations. You know, the Christian denomination, I think it's Jehovah's Witness, that doesn't allow for blood transfusions. Well, the reason for that is that they were afraid that if they got someone else's blood who was bad, who was an evil person, that somehow or another that evil blood would flow into them. I know that it sounds kind of silly on the surface, but let me tell you, at some level it runs very, very deep within the human psyche. We need to understand what Jesus is talking about, because whether you've come aware of it or not on a conscious level, believe me, we've all dealt with it in our lifetime and are probably still dealing with it now. This notion of consuming another, flesh and blood. And to Jesus' credit, he stands up to the Jews of his time and he repeats 3 times in this passage that you have to eat his flesh and drink his blood. He makes it crystal clear about doing that. The way that I came to understand this passage a little bit better was in going over a film that had first been shown to me when I was a senior in high school by my Greek and Latin teacher. And why he ever showed it to us at the time, I had no idea until years later. And then it became clear to me what he was trying to do. The film was called Nanook of the North. How many of you have ever seen that classic black and white silent film? You're showing your age a little bit. But it's a classic film in the silent film genre. All right? Clearly in black and white. And what it is it's a story about a small group of Inuit Eskimos, Inuit Indians, who live way north of the Arctic Circle. And of course, the film is set in the winter, at the most severe time of their lives. And it shows the men of this Inuit village going off to fish. And of course, the ice is thick at that point in time. And so what they do is they get this very kind of rudimentary saw, and you see them hacking through the ice, and you're wondering, what in the world is this film all about? And they finally form this circle in the ice. And they don't have anything like a sophisticated rod and reel. They just have a simple line of some sort. It was probably filmed in the 1910s or 1920s. And so they had this hook that they had fashioned themselves, and I don't even recall any bait being on the end of the hook. I'm not a fisherman, but at least I know you've got a bait hook. And they put it in this hole. And it's in real time you see them fishing. And lo and behold, all of a sudden they get this huge bite. And all four of these men, they're heaving to get this line pulled in. And lo and behold, out of this hole in the ice emerges this huge fish. They can barely have enough space in the diameter of this ice hole to get the fish out of it. It's huge. It's at least that long. And when we boys were watching it in high school, we were amazed at the size of that fish. I mean, I've told fish stories before. This was a pretty big fish. Well, the immediate thing that came to my mind, being a senior in high school, was those four guys better hurry up and get back to the village, give that fish to the women, let them cook it up, and let them salt it so they'll have enough to eat for the rest of their horrid winter up there north of the Arctic Circle. But that's not what those guys did. I watched in awe at them taking their time, almost in slow motion, cutting the belly of that fish, and then taking out the heart, and they ate it. Yeah, I was a little repulsed. But then, years later, I realized what they were doing. That fish had given its life for their village, and they wanted to do the same. And the only way that they could do that symbolically was to eat the heart of that fish. Because it was a brave fish. It had given its life for others. And they wanted to be the same. They wanted to be noble. They wanted to be more than just Inuit fishermen in some obscure village north of the Arctic Circle. They wanted to become like God. Now we're starting to get what Jesus is talking about when he says, I'll give you these very simple things that you can do that will remind you very much of my flesh and of my blood, and you must do them. Here's bread, common to everybody. You don't need to be a wealthy Jew at the time in order to have a loaf of bread in the house. You don't have to be wealthy either to have a little bit of wine, which of course at the time of Jesus was a more sanitary way of consuming liquid than water. Water could kill you with all of the bacteria in it. The wine had properties that repelled all of that bacteria and purified the body. And ever since then, we've been doing that. You want to be repelled? Then don't come to communion. But if you want to get into the spirit of what Jesus is talking about, if you want to really experience what it means to be united with God in some way, then come forward for communion and eat the flesh and drink the blood. That's exactly what we're doing, Sunday in and Sunday out. We're reenacting something that lies at the heart of humanity, which is to aspire to be united to the divine. And I know of no better way to do it than to receive Holy Communion. It's why it's so sacred and stands almost alone in our culture. There's nothing I know of that is as sacred in my life every week as receiving the body of Christ. Bread and wine, common, everyday things, but taken to a level that unites us to God and gives us an opportunity to breathe again, to be nourished in a way that nothing else will nourish us, not even all of those fabulous desserts last night. To be nourished in the body and blood of Christ is something that allows us to touch the divine We do it in so many other ways. Whenever we're around a great person, and some of you have been around great people in your life, there's almost a primitive urge to want to get close to that person, or maybe talk to that person, or even touch that person. I mean, one of the claims to fame that I have in my crazy life is that I was able to give Desmond Tutu a soft drink once. And I'll never forget it. I was around a very special person. And all I had to do was give him a Coca-Cola. He was thirsty. He said, "Tastes mighty good." Those are the key moments that we all look forward to being part of in our lives. And here we have it, an accessible God who says, just come to church. Just come to church and worship with the people of God. And come forward and receive Holy Communion. Receive it and be blessed. Receive it and be transformed. Receive it and live.